And we are live. Welcome, everybody, to this closing panel. GTA 6, GTA PlatformCon 25. We're live. Mallory, what's up? Where are you driving to?
I am driving home from the airport. So, yeah, just on the highway, cruising home.
The action was real. PlatformCon.
Super real.
Welcome, everybody. So we're gonna do a final wrap up, 45 minutes chat about the week. It was real intense. It was super fun. And just go around the horn in a bit. I just wanted to drop a couple of stats because the week was impressive. So we've had for the entire week. Well, actually, let's start with the live days. We had 770 people in London. Insane. And when I was in London, so the only person that did London, except for a couple of us in the team, is Rickey. That flew with us from one to the other. So Rickey, you're the only person in the world that can give us feedback on both.
Give unbiased opinion on both of them. Yes.
Unbiased. Absolutely unbiased. But we had 770 people in London, and I thought, like, wow, like everything was like perfect, went smooth, everyone was happy, everyone was ecstatic. And I was like, karmically, New York is going to be a disaster. And so, like, when we flew over, it was like, nah, and we only had 2 hours setup time, blah, blah. But the team did a fantastic job, and New York was super fun yesterday as well. We had 440 people there. First year that we did it. Super, super fun. We also had over 9,000 people in the virtual workshops. So that was also very, very fun, and about 30,000 people that kind of flew through all the virtual talks and all the stuff. So thanks everybody for being a part of it. It was special. It was a really fun week. All right, so let's start with you, Rickey. How was it? You were at both.
I think it was great. My voice is still a little hoarse from panels and keynotes. I noticed that this morning at breakfast with one of my clients. I thought it was incredible. One, it was my first PlatformCon, and two, having being able to do both events in London and New York. Much like you said, I thought that London was great. The excitement, the enthusiasm, the sheer amount of practitioners was pretty great, and then New York was even better. I thought the people that we had speaking, the panelists that we had for both events was incredible. Just one highlight was Kelsey's panel. His opening keynote was extremely superb. I told him that every time I hear him talk, it motivates me to do a better job on any keynote or anything that I'm doing, because he's just such a fantastic storyteller from a technical standpoint. And then I also thought that the difference between this conference and a lot of the other conferences that I go to is just that it's platform engineering led. Like, it's so much focus on platform engineering, the foundations, the fundamentals, both from a practitioner standpoint, and then the outcomes that you're able to provide to your organization. I thought it was incredible. So I wanted to highlight those two things, and we had a great time. It was a blast. It was really fun. Loved hanging out with you guys, Luca and Sam and Florian over in London, and then you and Sam and Casper, and folks like James over here in New York. Really, really fun.
Yeah, and I think what you said, it was fun for us too. It was fun flying together, hanging out at the lounge and almost missing the flight.
Yes.
But what you said with the quality was, I think, like the most consistent feedback that I heard from everybody that was there. That is just like, wow, this like persona, so spot on. Like everybody was just like really like, Gregor said it in a very German way. Gregor Hope in London was like, I'm German and I don't say these things lightly, but this was really great. There was nobody that shouldn't have been here. There was no random people. Everybody was really was really passionate. So yeah, that was that's definitely been, I think, a highlight. Just like really this community coming together. We've been virtual for so long, and Live Day London last year was the first little experiment, but this year it really feels like it really, came all together for the first time. So that was super fun. James, you were in New York. What did you think? What did you like? What didn't you like?
Yeah, and I think we did a watch party last year in Austin, and that was a little taster of, would this be a good idea to do something, in person? And I think the signal last year was yes, and the confirmation this year is yes, definitely. Like that definitely improved. I think a lot of the collaboration conversations, the sort of the hallway track for some of these pieces. I think the event space, felt big in a kind of small way, right? Like it's a really good opportunity to speak to people directly.
Yeah.
I saw people hanging in the corridors, just waiting for Kelsey's next word.
Yeah.
She's like, tell me a little bit more of the magic, right? Like that's the kind of thing that I think it is very difficult to replicate. I guess that's something that people are always looking for, but like it's hard to get programmatically. So love to see some of those sort of community things happen in person. I think it was, a lot of people trying to express that same sentiment of like, I'd like to find my tribe, and is this there? And I think a lot of people did find that, right? Found that sort of engagement. And I think it's a really good reminder that it is very community led. That's the best bits of some of the sort of DevOps movement pieces and where we've seen things work best, where it is community led.
Yeah, Kelsey did not stop. He was the last one to leave yesterday. I was like, you didn't shut up for a second. I was like, no, but it's really important. All these people came out. Like, got emotional yesterday. It was good. It was good. Mallory, what are your highlights? Not from the drive.
Yeah, I
from
mean,
yesterday.
any event, the drive is good. Any event where I lose my voice is a good event, is sort of what I've come to learn over the past few years. So if I sound like this, it's a good thing. It was my first time kind of being in person with the platform engineering community in this way. And honestly, it was awesome. Thank you to every single person that, came and said hello and introduced themselves. But it was so great to talk to so many different people who are all starting to fall into this like platform as a product, doing it the right way mindset. And like, I didn't debate a single person on this stuff. Whereas in the past at other events, it's people have been like, yeah, isn't it just DevOps? And no one, everyone's getting it. And I think that was fantastic. And to also see what, other companies, what the folks that were there with their booths were doing and talking to them and just sort of seeing the practitioner space evolve. And the conversations is absolutely fantastic. And I really loved just watching people mingle and it felt very intimate. James was right. Like it was big, but also small. And that was a cool feeling.
Yeah, 100%. And I agree on the maturing angle, right? Like I think year over year, you really see the compounding. I think Sam on stage yesterday was talking about the fact that in London, the opening panel last year was like, what is platform engineering? And this year, what does great platform engineering look like? And really, we're advancing the conversation. I thought your talk, James, was really highlighting some of these things, and maybe we can start getting into some of those aspects as well. Because I've seen, like, I don't know what you guys think, but like one common sort of thread that I've seen both across the talks and the conversations, but also the roundtable. For example, we had this like analyst roundtable yesterday in New York, and then we had just like a broader roundtable in London the day before the event kicked off. And you could really see this theme around sort of like, okay, now we're really looking to understand, okay, what are non-negotiables, right? And people really sharing more mature enterprise stories. It's no longer like, hey, in the last couple of years, there was a lot of like, oh, we're gonna do this, and that, and this is our plan for our platform initiative. Now it's like, well, actually, we have done it. We're like X years into the initiative, and this is the hardcore data. This is the the kind of like hard earned lessons, right? And a lot of it always falls back on, I think, one of your favorite words, James, social technical, right? And like really, both the technical and the cultural aspects of platform engineering. But it's so interesting to see like people that are, also already advanced in their setup, but they're still struggling with this. Like there was this guy yesterday, I'm not going to say the company, but he builds Call of Duty, which was cool. And he said, like clearly they have a very advanced technical setup, but then he was still struggling really with this like us versus them mentality, developers and infrastructure group developers and platform teams, or platform team versus infra architects, right? And all this like multidimensional dynamics. So I thought that was very interesting, and I think like something that you're seeing also a lot of, James, right, on the field.
Yeah, I think there's a piece that we reflected on a little bit already, which is we're no longer having those initial conversations of why am I doing this, and like that's I think that's the fundamental piece behind this, isn't it? Like we're now having conversations. I have conversations with customers where they're like, oh, my leadership team are asking for this. So that's a reverse of I think what we saw a year ago, 2 years ago, where they're like, I'm trying to explain it to my
Bottom
leadership
up,
team,
right?
right? But now they're like, no, my CTO is coming to me and saying like, I hear this is important. I have these problems, I have these challenges, and so it's through that lens I think that we're looking at, which is even though we've made progress on some of these platforms, there's a sort of glass ceiling, if you want, for how much you can do, organically. And eventually you're going to need that sponsorship. You're going to need that sort of exec level buy-in, to understand and sort of build this into a much deeper piece of your company's sort of technical operations and cultural operations, right? Just that becomes a standard for things going forward. I think we've seen a couple of sort of takeaways that, and this is a little bit my opinion, right? Like it's not like Google says, so don't tweet my boss on this one, but like just some thoughts for it. Like I think we've definitely seen there isn't really a right way of doing platform engineering, right? There's a lot of different ways of doing it. There's a few wrong ways. Like there's a few things where we've definitely stubbed our toes on. Like if you're doing a 5-year plan for your platform engineering, that's probably the wrong way. Like please don't do that, right? Like, the right level of time for it, I don't know. I don't think any of us really know what we plan for in that. If you think that your platform engineering is one and done, you've completed that project, that's definitely the wrong way. Right, like that's definitely not going to work. You definitely can't just lock this down and say like, well, that's done now, and I'll come back in a few years' time, right? Like you're going to need to kind of continuously improve those things. So I do think we found out a few of those things were definitely blockers in these areas, and I'm sure there's more.
Yeah, thanks. What are you?
Ricky's nodding.
And James, I'm nodding because I'm nodding because
violently nodding.
We're seeing the same thing. James, you and I talk fairly often, and we're seeing the same thing. And it was refreshing to see the community starting to move in a direction that says, hey, we're acknowledging that we think that these things are all challenges that we're facing, and to Mallory's point, that we're all kind of starting to speak the same collective language around how to articulate these problems, how to measure the impact and the downward pressure that we're getting from that people are getting from their C-suite or their senior executives or management and leadership is actually another validation point of that, right, where it's like, hey, we might be doing a bunch of different things and having a bunch of different investments, but if we want to go a little bit faster, want to make better quality into the product, we want to have better business outcomes, all of those things are starting to trickle down into, hey, we need to have a better platform engineering strategy, we need to have better investment strategy. And I think that it was validated by a lot of the conversations that I was having in both London and in New York. It just made sense.
Yeah, and I thought it was also interesting. This as another vector of this sort of like maturation of platform engineering. this really seeing that we're really hitting this like inflection point that I think we've been talking about in the community, but that really started crystallizing in a lot of these conversations throughout the week around platform engineering. Really, you mentioned, James, like the energy of the DevOps conferences and so on, like really like taking over a lot of this like kind of like enterprise IT sort of layer, and a lot of people very curious, I think, along two dimensions. One, we have, I said it a couple of times on stage throughout the week, the fastest growing segment in the community is data engineers. We have a lot of security people, observability folks, a lot of people from these adjacent fields coming in and trying figuring out, okay, how do we overlap, right? Like, how do we break down the silos between, data over here and kind of like ops, SDLC, platform engineering over there, right? And so, like, how do we update our mental models, our blueprints, the reference architectures, and so on, to think about it that way? But then at the same time, we've had literally people coming up during the networking, kind of like, hey, like, I'm in health, right? Like, I'd love to have something that's like more specific to us. I'm in financial services. I've had a conversation with a DoD person about government stuff, and so I think that's another interesting dimension where you see the maturing of the space, where it's really starting to think about, how do I bridge the gap with this other teams? What are the implications of our work from an org chart perspective, and then also how do we think about it from an industry standpoint, right? What did you see on those fronts?
It's also the
Go
one
ahead.
thing that I'm really kind of glad to start seeing, but it's honestly interesting too, is like stuff like these more regulated industries. It's things like all of a sudden people actually are asking, okay, how do I translate this into actual business value? How do I do what the business is asking me to do, and then continue proving to them that it's worth investing in, because that's, half the battle. But the conversations now are less dismissive about that, because for so long it felt like, oh, just the technology part. But now it's people are very serious about the business value these things drive. And, like, that is, I think, why it's becoming so pervasive, because yes, people are talking about it, but the value is there and the proof is in the pudding, if you will. Which I think is fascinating, and it makes sense in like government and highly regulated industries. Once you see that value prove itself in that space, it's a matter of time. And I think that's what we're seeing now, is the start of this like flood, essentially, of platform engineering in those spheres.
Mm-hmm.
I think there's a few bits there to again like drill into. So one is when we talk about things like government or highly regulated industries, those are the areas that have really struggled to adopt things like DevOps. And so it's not through, I think, lack of intent. Like, it's not that they're not trying their best in those areas, but they've definitely struggled with, I think, some of the ideas, in the DevOps space of, hey, we'll just, we'll work this out, on the fly, and we'll sort of try and work together on these pieces, and this is great. And then suddenly there is a regulation, or there is an external constraint or concern, and it's been very difficult to industrialize that.
Right.
And I think when we come to how we do that, like I've definitely seen, I think, some really good sort of individual cases that have gone well in that. But how we do that, and I use the term like DevOps at scale quite a bit, right? Like how you repeat that DevOps magic that's occurred in some of these areas. That's the bit that's driving, I think, these conversations. Like how do I make this happen consistently? The magic, when it does work, we've all seen it. We all see those organizations, and someone tells us those stories. We're like, it reminds us of the Phoenix Project. We're like, yeah, that's exciting. We made it happen. But then the next organization, it doesn't happen. And we're like, well, it's something to do with the culture. I don't know. Right. But there's repeatable pieces to this. There's things we can pull out and understand. There is, and one of the things we front and center for the talk that I gave yesterday was, if you're not doing this for business value, you should really have a think about that. That's the core reason why we're doing these things. You can make friends with the spreadsheet people, right? Like, it's fine. Like, that's not a problem. You're not enemies. the reason why you're doing this is for those pieces. And as an IT industry, we've always struggled with that in many ways. Like, it's always seen as a cost center. Like, it's something where I want to minimize the amount of IT usage, and it's like that's not the practical reality in 2025. Like, minimize your IT usage. It's not what your customers are asking for. It's not really what your board is asking for in these scenarios. They're like, no, I want to get more benefits. Tell me how to get more benefits. But how do I do that in a repeatable way? How do I be more consistent in those deliveries instead of sort of constantly having to do these transformation initiatives, or we try and get these things working in sort of unrepeatable ways? How do we make it more repeatable, but in a human way, right? In a way that's responsive to the needs of our internal customers. How do we standardize, but without making things difficult for folks, right? We've always done that in the industry as well. We've over standardized, frustrated our customers, frustrated internal or external. Oh, I want these options, or we remove those. They were too expensive, so we've stopped giving you those options. No, like that's not what our customers are asking for. Like, and so how we make that repeatable, how we take those parts of those systems, and how we translate that in the same language for again our spreadsheet friends, how we help understand what those things are. That's made like significant improvements, and I think that's also the stage of our journey that we're in.
Yeah,
More nods from Rickey. Like,
yeah, because I mean, the highly regulated kind of federal and government environment is interesting because that's where I grew up in, like before coming to ThoughtWorks, right? I worked in the defense and federal contracting area when DevOps was coming out. And during my talk, I actually showed the Phoenix Project, the book. It came out in 2018, and that kind of early scene, and we struggled a lot because at that point, regulatory compliance, proving your security posture, your authority to operate, all of those things was just a spreadsheet activity, right? It was, here's all of your standards from NIST, and you go through each one of those and you say, okay, well, how are you doing key rotation? All right, let's go and show how we're doing the key rotation. I think what we've started to see more and more, whether it's DevOps at scale, platform engineering, or even just kind of the normal DevOps processes, baking those things and having those conversations in as a part of business value instead of it just being, well, a secondary thing, right? There's actual business value in being able to work in a highly secure and regulated environment, right? Not having a lot of outages, being more resilient. That's actually that's customer impact directly. If your system's not up, your customers can't use it. So, like baking all of those things into your underlying platform, into the approach, having those conversations about how do those things tie into direct business value for either end users or customers. I think that's been something that's been extremely transformative to not only platform engineering, but just conversations that we're having with security experts in the field, or your compliance officers, or financial services type customers and clients. And then James, to your point, what you end up seeing is that conversation starting to change about, well, what is the inherent value of IT at my company? Is it just, okay, we want to reduce cost and CapEx cost, or is it actually an innovation engine? And that conversation is starting to happen more and more, when it's like, well, I can add in 30 developers and get a ton more business value out of that investment versus, okay, we're just cutting cost and cutting cost and cutting costs. So it's interesting to see the transition from when DevOps was first coming out and we were first talking about continuous integration and delivery to now.
I see you nodding a lot, Mallory, behind the wheel.
It's just, I know.
Wasn't that a lot of the training, a lot of the kind of one of the key topics of your trainings yesterday? This like, how do we translate this technical value into effectively going and selling this minimum viable platform to stakeholders, right?
Yeah, it's such a big part of it. And it's the one thing that will continually be a discussion in all of those classes, all of the coaching I do is, okay, we have technical value. Now, how do we make this relevant to the business? Because business doesn't care how your pipelines are built. The business doesn't care about, you know, your throughput, like code metrics. It doesn't matter to them. What matters is the outcome. How competitive are you? How fast can you fix a problem? And how much money are you spending and time to do all these things? And what is the cost of these things? And I think like one of the really interesting things that came out of the classes yesterday was some questions about the concept of shifting left versus shifting down. And I think, you know, this idea of shifting left, which is more traditional DevOps, really, really falls apart in, you know, regulated organizations because it's really hard to maintain a standard. And it's true, we've had this tendency to over standardize everything, but that's because we've not found a great way to automate the delivery of standards. So, you know, questions about shifting left versus down came up yesterday, and this idea of shifting down to the platform is kind of the way people are starting to talk about this stuff, which is good. Like it's slowly breaking through that mentality that you have to shift this stuff left or you have to throw things over the fence. And I think it'll come out with a better engineering culture at the end. Like that's something I'm really interested to see is as we start going down this platform engineering path, which is a strategic technology trend, says Gardner, especially in big organizations. Like it's not something that people are just sort of saying, yeah, okay, that's cool now. It is, yeah, you know what? We need to do this because there's business value. So I think from, you know, that perspective, I'm really excited to see what next year's PlatformCon brings in terms of the stories people have. Yeah. And I think you guys are all like, we're all on the same page here. It's great.
Yeah. I mean, that was I really like that. That was, I think, like a quote in your talk as well, James, right? Like the, the shift down, don't shift left. And I thought like maybe like just to tie it together, one interesting sort of thread that I also saw was, you know, obviously connected to all this is like, okay, who actually then does the selling, right? Is it kind of, you know, and so we put a lot of pressure on this figure of the platform product manager, you know, and obviously you were giving the talk with Leah, James, who kind of like drives a lot of that within Google as well. I'm just curious, right? Because I think I've heard contrasting sort of points of view. So on the one hand, there are people that are like, well, you know, you're much, and Camille actually also mentioned this yesterday on stage, right? It was like, well, you're better off like kind of like raising all boats and sort of like, you know, making sure that everybody understands it's like platform as a product, you know, mindset. And, you know, she actually, I think, sat on stage, Camille Fournier, yesterday, you know, every platform engineer needs to be a product manager or along those lines, right? And then there's another camp where it's like, well, no, you know, and you know, Mallory actually hosted this fantastic closing panel yesterday with, you know, Yej and some other amazing like platform product managers from the industry, where it's like, no, you know, really the 80-20 is the platform product manager, is this you know, this figure that really drives that. And so, you know, within this kind of like broader framework of like, okay, we want to be able to shift down, not left, and you know, really productize and package all of this as a service, as a product to our developers, right? Like, who's doing the product work? Is it everybody? Is it somebody? Like, where do you stand, James?
Yeah, and you know, I think there's a really good couple of pieces here, and we did deliberately talk about some of the shift left pieces because shift left has, like all things, it's there's been some sort of diffusion of the term. Like a lot of times, it means a lot of different things to people, and so, you know, I don't think we are saying like don't shift left. You know, like I think that's been very successful for a lot of teams. I think the bit that we're saying is if you're doing the same thing for like more than once, you should always in this industry be thinking, do I need to be doing this? Like I talk about a lot about this with SRE teams, like the toil that we've made here, like we've done this manually, and you know, do we need to do it again? Like, is there not something that we can do? So if each of your teams is having to have a 2-week sprint to deal with something in a particular way, and they're doing this hundreds of times, the shift left bit, while it's working, can't be sustainable at that point. right? Like, why are you doing this 100 times? You know, you're just burning a lot of time and energy to do the same thing over and over again, essentially. So that's why I think we're increasingly saying, like, it's great to shift left, but if you're doing something new, the old stuff should be then start being pulled down into the platform, pulled down into your platform components. And this segues into who makes that call. The individual teams are trying their best. They're on the front lines. They're trying to understand how to do these pieces and work those out. But how do they know that another team somewhere has the same challenge? How do they know that what they're solving is similar to another team somewhere on the other side of the company? That's the problem at scale in these areas, that you just don't know those things. And that's why for small teams, I have startups, we had this conversation, they're like, none of this seems relevant to me. And I'm like, because it's not a problem for you. You don't need this because it's
Yeah.
obvious when you speak to the other members of your team that you're duplicating effort, and so you just stop doing that. But suddenly you've got 1,000 engineers. Suddenly they're all in these different teams. Suddenly, several teams are solving the same problem. Who would know that? Whether it's a product manager or not, that's kind of our way of trying to solve those things, right? Is pull a product manager in to try and understand across that space what's happening, because those individual teams are busy in their areas. If you ask those individual teams like to try and understand the wider landscape, that's healthy. Like, you know, we shouldn't be boxing our teams in, but we can't expect them to have that big picture. Like, it's not fair on those individual teams as well. So I think that's why we ask the project managers to do this, to take that big picture view of that, but we shouldn't be throwing it over the wall to them. We shouldn't be saying, well, that's a PM problem. You know, I did my Jira ticket. No, no, no. They should be providing that feedback. You should be working with them. And how do we know this works? That's how we do external services. That's how we do consumer facing services. If we do it for our consumer facing services, why is that not good enough for our internal users? It should be. Like, that's how we do it properly for external stuff. Let's do it properly for internal stuff. Does that make some sense?
Yeah, it makes perfect sense to
I'm
me,
three
James,
for three
because
on nodding,
yeah,
Ricky.
yeah,
It's
yeah,
fantastic.
yeah, yeah. That's if that's the indicator, then we've got success. Because during my talk over in London, I mentioned this concept, and it's something that I think even Gregor has mentioned is exactly what you said, treating the internal platform as a SaaS product. So once you start doing that, you start seeing these kind of patterns emerge. Which, if you were like the example that I always use is if you're Salesforce and you're selling this SaaS product to other businesses, there's a bunch of different things that you end up doing as a part of that. Which is, hey, I've got to go out and do customer research and marketing, and I have platform. I have product people that are doing that, and that's the external. I'm going to pull in capabilities. I'm going to pull in my user base's needs, and I'm going to do a lot of work on jobs to be done. I'm going to do a lot of this kind of product type work, and then you're going to have one of the concepts that we've been talking about with a lot of our clients is, well, how do you engage? How does the platform team then engage with the user base that they have? And a company like Salesforce would have a customer success team. Why don't we have developer success teams that are going and doing that outreach and are interacting with them? So, hey, let's think about that as a construct to interact with those developer teams, not only to help them uplift and onboard onto the platform, but to actually get feedback about what's working, what's not working, what are they doing, and then pull those capabilities back in and make the platform better. So that feels like the pull down piece, where we're pulling things down into the platform from the developer teams and then helping them on things that need to shift left. And so that's why that resonated so much with me, James, how you were kind of articulating that concept. And then one other thing that I think we're doing at ThoughtWorks that is, I think it's pretty interesting, when we go in and we kind of do that first assessment of where some teams are at, and then what shift left looks like, is that we generally do like a value stream map, and the frequency of something happening versus how long it takes to take place. So if testing or security takes a really, really long time for that process to happen, that might be a candidate for, hey, let's shift some of this left. But if it happens a lot, and there's a ton of frequency on something, and it's happening over and over and over, even if it's happening just like one or two times, like I'm constantly building something multiple times a day, Maybe that's something that can get pulled into the platform where I'm only doing that once. I'm getting faster feedback. I'm getting all of these benefits that's there that reduces some of the toil on developers. So it's interesting to hear how you articulated that and this very scientific, methodical, ThoughtWorks type way that we're doing it. But it's ton of overlap there. So that was my violent nodding in agreement that I normally do when I'm on Zoom calls.
Right. No, I think again, like this is an engineering discipline, right? Like this is something we need to eat our own dog food here. We need to apply. These are not, when we say socio-technical, like it means it's technical as well. Like, are we applying our own engineering rigor to ourselves? Should something be automated? Should it not be automated? Like, and we ask our product managers to be technical, right? The idea isn't that they're just a program manager and they're ticking boxes. They need to sit with engineers, understand the technical problems, look at the YAML, go look at the code for these pieces. Like, that's our ask here because this is inherently a technical problem that we need to think about solving, but then act as the bridge, right? Understand, right? Because I've seen the technical challenge here, but Rickey, to your point, like, is this the right thing to put into our roadmap at this point in time? And does that resonate? Does that land with our executive team at the moment for what they're looking for and how that fits into the wider business goal? So like that combination piece is each bit is important. The social bit, like the understanding of where that goes, but also the technical piece, right? We need to have that deep level understanding, and I think that's why we ask for technical project managers and understand these pieces for those things.
And not to like, because I agree, and it's interesting about that product manager role, because in some organizations, the traditional product management role, you'll see the rebadging of project managers as product managers, and that is not very successful most of the time. But for technical product managers, it there's a higher level of success to take, a kind of a senior engineer that has that product mindset and then rebadge them as a technical product manager, because it is this intersection of having deep technical understanding how developers actually develop code also is extremely helpful for a technical product manager on the platform team. But then having that product mindset, being able to go and talk to the developers and extract some of those use cases that are there, it's a unique role. It takes a lot of unicorns, which is why the training that Mallory has been doing and some of that education that she's doing is extremely important, right? We're able to identify what those people look like, get the characteristics, and then just get them upskilled and say, hey, we've got a person that is 70% of the way there. The training that happens can get them over the finish line.
And
they just need that little bit.
No, go on. Mm-hmm. I was going to tee up Mallory on this base. I think just quickly, I think a lot of times people are like, well, I just need to hire the right person for this. And I'm like, probably not. You probably have the right person for it. You probably want to do some training, right? It's totally normal that we do training in so many parts of areas of our lives, right? You want to get better at something, we normally do a training course. Like we normally go and get some mentoring. We do training for these things and we build up those skills. And sometimes we're like, I guess we'll never know how to fix this problem. Properly train. Sorry, go on, Mallory.
No, that's actually like kind of along the lines of what I was going to say is like, I get asked all the time, like, I don't have a product owner for my team. What am I going to do? And I'm like, what, as a developer, you need, what you want. You know how to talk to these people. You might have pretty decent skills at translating nerd to normal, so you can talk to leadership too. Why not just put the time into understanding how you need to really treat it like a product and basic product management, and you can do just fine. Like, I see some very experienced product people, like we had on our panel yesterday, but then I also see people coming from that engineering role into product and vice versa, which we also had the panel yesterday, which was really cool. Sure, you don't have a person with that title on paper, but that doesn't mean that role, that archetype can't be filled. And I think there's sometimes a lot of value in an archetype way of thinking, because so much of platform engineering is thinking outside the box, about how to solve problems, technical problems, and how to really create value from it. And it's the exact same with feeling the folks that are on the team, the folks that have these roles. So yeah, and it is really what we talk about in the training. It's all this stuff.
Yeah, and the trainings were insane, and I just want to do a quick plug here, because one of the big things that we announced this week was our expansion of the course ecosystem for the community, which is really something that we've been putting a lot of work in. I mentioned earlier this idea of platform engineering hitting this inflection point, and you know, having to figure out how to bridge the gap and collaborate with data teams and security teams and other folks. And that's really why we are working with experts and with vendors and tool providers to really put together these materials that go beyond just this traditional core track of the platform engineer and really deep dive into observability platform engineering, and data platform engineer is going to come very soon. We have CDEs and a bunch of other deep dives, so definitely recommend people go check that out on university.platformengineering.org. Quick plug. And after that, I just want to wrap up maybe on a final thread, because it wouldn't be PlatformCon 2025 closing panel if we didn't say the word AI at least once. But it's interesting because we wrote this article in the community like a couple months ago. We were talking, and Rickey, you and I have been going back and forth, and actually the roundtable that we hosted in London ended up revolving around this for like 2 very passionate hours of people yelling at each other at some point. We were basically sort of defining the space as, okay, there is AI for platform engineering, right? And AI enabled platforms, and how do we think about LLMs interfaces? How do we think about different interfaces like notebooks as opposed to like a CLI or a portal or whatever? How do we think about agentic workflows to turbocharge the backends of the platforms and so on? And then the flip side of that, which is platforms for AI, right? So how do we, and I think this is very interesting because while we see sort of AI overshadowing, I think, a lot of trends, it seems it's really turbocharging platform engineering, because ultimately you have to you fall back onto the platform, right? And I think it's another interesting conversation and thread that we had yesterday at the roundtable with the analysts in New York, was really this idea of kind of from an org chart perspective, all these enterprises setting up this kind of like AI ops automation team that goes and tries to automate a bunch of workflows, but at the end they are also falling on the kind of like the platform engineer shoulders, if you will, at the end of the day, right? So how do we think about that separation of concerns, and how do we think about this platforms? How do platforms need to evolve to support all these new workloads? And that's something that James, you mentioned for like years. Every time, because obviously and we talked about it Google Next. I think the last time I saw you, obviously Google Next is a lot of it was about AI, but you've been saying like, hey, we can talk about AI all you want, but at the end of the day, without the platform underneath, what are we gonna do here?
Yeah, and I think we should double down on this. These are not mutually exclusive things, right?
Yeah.
Like we can walk and chew gum, but we've done research in this space. You can look at some of the sort of Dora generative AI research. I think that's just a really good pointer. I help with that, so I'm biased on that, but it is good as well. So to have a think about what the impact of AI is on some of these pieces, look at some of the research in these areas, and they will tell you that you will need effective platforms in order to use AI effectively. Those things will keep coming back. And so, we have to think about what we're going to do in some of these areas that is going to change. We have to think that AI is going to be embedded in so many of these activities going forward, and we don't quite know why or how at this point in time. But there's loads of disruptive technologies we've tackled in the past where we haven't been sure exactly what's going to happen next. But we do know some of these core pieces that are going to be the same. Does AI need to show value for the business? Yes. That's not going away. We've still got that question from businesses. Where's the bottom line? How is this helping me improve my business value? I guarantee you we'll have this conversation in a year's time exactly the same as we are today. We will still be looking for business value from AI investments. At the moment, if you had to bias it, where do we see organizations trying to look at the value of AI? it's really in their business. It's not necessarily in their AI stack. So it's great if you're using AI to improve some of your stack and improve platform engineering. That's fantastic. But the real ask is, how do I get my platforms to support the level of AI I want to use in my business processes and my front end? So that's, I think, the pressure that we're seeing now. How do I get models quickly in? How do I get inference working at scale? That's what the platform engineers, I think, really should be focusing on this year, right? If there's one big takeaway, get your platforms ready so that when a new model comes in or a new request comes in, I need to host this. You're like, oh, let's put it in the backlog 6 months before we can start hosting that. That's not going to be okay. So the platform seems to think like, how do I get this in production in a week or a couple of weeks, right? Instead of a couple of months. That's the core job of platform teams. That's a huge opportunity, right, for platform teams, right, in this space to shine in those areas for stuff that immediately will then have business value for that. So I think that's going to be the focus. It doesn't stop you from doing some work sort of within your platform to make it better and to use AI on that basis. But like the role here is supporting the business, and that's where people really, I think, are looking for AI at the moment. Like, how does it improve my business? Help me with the platform to build this on top of.
I agree with you, James, because we're seeing that more and more um, as these companies start to experiment with it. I've noticed globally what everyone is doing first is, where's my chatbot? Right? They start with a chatbot in an interface. It's a very simple experiment. They're able to do stuff. They can get kind of some of the agentic stuff into their workflow. They can experiment. They can validate different hypotheses around the business, around the underlying technology stack, and how the platform can enable that. Most of those are, hey, it's going to take us 6 to 7 months to integrate that into the platform and build out this chatbot. And it's like, well, that's a really long amount of time. What is the platform team doing to then take, okay, if it's going to be a 6-month investment to start off with, that should be weeks, or that should be at least a month to, okay, we're going to bring in a new model, we're going to experiment more, we're going to get faster feedback to the business so that they can adapt to the volatility in the models and just the entire AI market and industry as it goes forward. So I think I agree that I have been probably one of the more bearish people in the industry around AI vocally. In the panel in London, I was like, we shouldn't be talking about this, but I mean that in the way that I think the hype is happening around AI, not that platform engineering teams should be aware of it, should be making investments to make their platforms more adaptive. But from an infrastructure standpoint, I think Aaron Erickson was making a ton of great points in the panel that I moderated in New York around, here's how to handle hardware convergence, where you've got general compute CPUs versus GPUs. Here's how to expose that to your developers through the platform so that they can experiment really quickly. And those are the types of investments that platform teams should be making this year so that they can prepare for things to come. I think that there's one other area that I'm also seeing that I want to add in, that I think that platform teams should be preparing for. It's the interfaces that the developers are using to actually interact with the AI elements within the SDLC, right? So is that going to be kind of new prompting interfaces or new conversational interfaces, notebooks, like bringing in some of the IDE elements? Because we're starting to see evidence that the current interfaces that are being exposed to developers, and it could be just maturity of the product life cycle and some of the other elements that are there, or just the maturity of engineering practices in general. We're starting to see toil getting introduced in orchestrating a bunch of different agents through the IDE. And so if platform teams are getting ahead of that, then their businesses are going to thrive. You're going to see, enterprise-wide adoption go up. You're going to see extraction of toil through that process. And so just getting ahead of some of the SDLC elements that are there, and the use of AI in the platforms. I think those are two things that for me are the biggest takeaways as we start to see more and more people say the agentic word, or say, how am I going to make sense of the AI investments that my CTO is bringing down from the board or from other CTOs as they're in the executive washrooms at some country club. So strategy by FOMO is starting to really, really take off. So, the platform teams have to be ahead of that.
Amen.
And I'll just add one thing really quickly because I know we're maybe not.
No, go ahead,
Sorry,
Mallory. Go
I
ahead.
pulled off, and apparently I pulled off in the worst. I'm in the worst spot possible to pull off, apparently. So I just want to say really quickly, the technology will change, the needs will change, but the philosophy we have in mind with platform engineering, the reason why we do things, having a reason why to begin with, and following that platform as product principle, that will stay, because that's what works. But the technology will change. And that's what I have to keep telling people every time they ask, well, how should I think about AI in this space? It's like, of course you should think about it. It's not going away. But as long as you still stay aligned with the best practices of doing platform engineering as a philosophy, as a way of thinking, and as a way of approaching problems, you're fine. That tech can always change.
Yeah. Really, really curious to see what we're going to talk about PlatformCon 26. So see you all in a year. Thank you for this. Thank you for being a part of this PlatformCon. It was very special this year. I had a ton of fun. Wrapping it up this way was really the best. Just a reminder for everybody, because I know there are a lot of people still trying to catch up with all the content deluge that happened online, especially. We also have recorded all the main stage talks at both live days. So we're going to post those next week on the YouTube channel. So you're going to get access to all of those. And there's going to be some really good and also unexpected nuggets in there. So stay tuned for that. And go check out University Platform Engineering. All right. Thank you, everybody. Thanks, James, Rickey, Mallory. See you around. See you later, Rickey. And
Yeah, of course.
Thanks, guys.
Thanks.
Thanks.